So hello, my name is Matthew Mauriello. I am an assistant professor at the University of Delaware. I'm in the Department of Computer and Information Sciences, and I am the director of the Sensify Lab. So today we're going to talk about advancing digital health, some AI-driven interventions for patient care and workflow optimization. So if you're curious about our research program, you can visit our website, sensifylab.org. It has a list of current people and projects and things that we're doing, which definitely span things from healthcare, education, and still environmental sustainability. But today we're mostly going to be talking about healthcare, or at least interventions that could help with digital well-being and digital health. So as we sort of all know, we can't really escape AI. It's everywhere. So it's in our employment, systems and things. We constantly hear about AI being used to help screen people applying to jobs. This can be very problematic. It's involved in our housing systems, government, education, finance, healthcare, and in just about everything else. So we can find examples of AI trying to give us recommendations for all sorts of products and services and ads and things of that nature, with the idea of trying to help our lives out, but we all know that there can be some general negative consequences to some of this involvement in AI in our lives. But on a positive note, AI and machine learning are turning personal and big data into interventions for better health, well-being, and performance, and that's really what we're going to be kind of talking about today. So further, new user patient-facing tools allow them to collect data, reflect on it, better self-manage their own care, and potentially creates new interactions with various different stakeholders. So that could be between like a patient and a doctor, or an athlete and a coach. So there's lots of data that we could be sharing that's about our situation, our performance, that might benefit these kinds of relationships. And while still early, AI insights from large language and large vision models are potentially changing how we do decision-making, or how experts do decision-making in various areas of our life. So that would include healthcare and finance and things of that nature. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about 3 projects that are currently being run as either in my lab or collaboratively with my lab at the University of Delaware. The first is Emotion Stream, which is roughly a personal informatics project for stress and productivity management. Next, I'll talk a little bit about wearables and machine learning for physical rehabilitation, and then the use of large vision models to support clinical decision-making about ultrasound images. We'll get a little bit into Emotion Stream now. This project is actually going to appear in a longer format at CHI 2025 in Japan, which I just heard they closed the registration list and now it's wait list. So just FYI for everybody. In any event, so the motivation for Emotion Stream was much like I was talking about a little bit earlier. Automated emotion recognition tools are increasingly being used to evaluate people's emotions in job interviews, in the workplace. So if you want to know how your employees are doing, how stressed they are, what the general happiness level is, there's a thought that we can apply these tools to video systems. If you're in a job interview, they might ask you to provide a video response to a question such as, why do you want to work here? And then they might apply one of these automated emotion recognition tools to that video. And if the tool doesn't say that you were happy while you were giving that answer, well, you just might not move on to the next phase of the interview. So around 2021, there was a bit of an uproar when we were getting this project started about these models actually being applied to the job interview policy. And of course, we sort of know that the underlying training data for these models tends not to react the same way for all persons, right? So immediately this is seen as kind of discriminatory because, well, kind of was. And so we sort of wanted to start asking some questions about how good are these tools at predicting the emotional states in the wild. So if we're just applying them to video feeds and things of that nature, like how good do these things work outside of like a perfectly lit environment? Can they assist with monitoring momentary stress? And could these predictions be used to intervene in the well-being of knowledge workers? So things like teachers and doctors and engineers, basically anyone who's going to spend their time sitting in front of a computer with a front-facing camera, creating lots of data about what they're doing with their peripheral devices and things of that nature. So is all of that data valuable for emotion and stress prediction? And so that kind of led us to the first project that we're going to talk about, Emotion Stream, or I spent 14 hours debugging just one assignment towards computer-mediated personal informatics for computer science student mental health. Now, We're hoping to bring this into knowledge workers, but as some of you may know, students are a great medium for studying stress. They're really stressed out. They have lots of assignments. They get all sorts of information, and they got to mediate all these different deadlines. And of course, that makes them a really interesting subject if you're looking to study, track, and monitor stress. Some other reasons why we kind of selected this population was that, well, in doing some of the lit review on this, anxiety and depression symptoms are 2 times higher in CS students compared to your general body of undergraduate students. Undergraduate students in general are 5 to 10 times more stressed than the general population. So students, again, great for studying stress. However, with CS students in particular, it's not clear why they experience this elevated level of stress. There's some work, looking into this. Stress is often a symptom or a feature of, other mental health conditions, so things like anxiety and depression. And so there have been some works at SIGSI, which is the Special Interest Group on Computer Science Education, to kind of look into this issue more thoroughly, but they've generally focused on people with pre-existing mental health conditions. So not just like the general audience or the general body of computer science departments. So we were interested in drilling in a little bit into, what are the causes for, CS student stress. And to do that, we conducted a need finding interview. So we did this with 20 CS students at the University of Delaware. We wanted to try and understand the reasons for elevated mental health challenges and their preferences for technological support. And so there's going to be a little bit more of that at Chi. So if you happen to be attending, please go see Shwaria's talk on that. And from that need finding interview, we then developed a novel computer mediated personal informatics tool called Emotion Stream. And then we conducted a field deployment to understand its acceptability and basically collect some of that data that we want to look at to audit some of these automated emotion recognition tools. Just to touch base on one of the challenges that CS students kind of pointed out was difficulty during programming, specifically debugging a program. One of our participants noted, I literally sat at my computer and cried. I did that for 15 minutes and then I settled down. There's been this time where I'm on a time crunch and I literally have no time to do anything else. I'm just reading my code over and over and over again millions of times because I have to get it in a few hours. And you're happy when it finally compiles. And basically they're saying, I've just been through every possible emotion while trying to debug a program. Now, they seem to indicate that there's a difference between programming and debugging. I believe them. I totally agree from my own personal experience. Coding is fun, debugging is not, right? So that's kind of what they're saying about the difficulty of the assignments or the workload that they're under. Additionally, some students love coding. They actually really like it. And they will admit to not being very aware of their mental state while doing it, right? Like you're kind of locked in for a few hours on a programming assignment. You don't really notice that you're not taking breaks and you're not taking care of yourself. So these are just some of the observations that we made while we were interviewing students about why they are stressed during their academic programs. So taking some insights from these challenges and things, we started to develop a experience sampling tool. So this is just a very simple application logging tool that we install on their computers. Whenever they're going to engage in some academic work, they can kind of start the tool. And then anytime the actual application logging tool detects using these automated emotional recognition models, a strong change in emotion or a window of about 20 minutes has elapsed, they'd get a short 1 minute survey that would say, what is your current sort of affect right now? How stressed are you on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest amount of stress one experiences? And then basically what kind of tasks are they doing right now? Are they coding? Are they debugging? That sort of thing. So our tool actually applies 2 automated emotion recognition tools circa 2021. So this was residual masking networks and deep face, which were kind of off-the-shelf models that you could apply and use locally without having to have an internet connection. In addition, we're doing things like context logging. So we're tracking not what they're typing, but how fast they're typing. So we type the cadence of the words. We don't try to kind of check what the content is, right? Because that would be privacy kind of violating. We also track mouse logging, so things like clicks and scrolls. And then we're also doing application logging. So we're understanding the time that they're spending in an IDE, in a browser, in whatever programs they have active up during that work session. And so we collected actually many hours of log data, probably close to 200 hours from only a few participants, which is pretty cool. So we launched a 1-week in the wild naturalistic study to evaluate this tool. We recruited 12 participants, 10 were in the original need finding study. So we have 2 like brand new participants in this pool. And basically what we're looking for is the sort of acceptability of the tool itself. And then primarily our interest is in collecting the data that the tool provides so that we can do some post hoc analysis to analyze the reliability of these AER models and look at the role of context in stress prediction. As far as just looking at some descriptive statistics that come out of that first sort of deployment, we can see much like we heard from the interviews, debugging is the highest activity that is most stressful for students. So very true. That's what they said in the interviews. That's what they actually logged while they were going through the tool. Now, it does appear that students don't read, but that's actually not true. They actually do read. However, they actually deem that as being pretty much like a no stress activity. I don't know that I agree with that, but at least for undergraduate students participating in this study, reading is the easy activity. Coding is almost as difficult as writing. And then just like they said, debugging is the sort of most critical, most stressful, activity they engage in terms of academic tasks. We also started looking at sort of how participants are sort of experiencing stress throughout the day. And if we kind of look over here on this, around noon, people start working, and then stress kind of starts to go up over the day and sort of tanks down at the end of the day, and no one's really working after 3 a.m. So this is sort of the time in which stress is accumulating, of course, over the course of the day, and we kind of know it rises as their days get more difficult. So these are just some qualitative findings out of that application logging period. Students generally, enjoyed using the tool, particularly as it's only a sort of visual dashboard reflection intervention that comes in at the end of their work session. But one of the participants mentioned, I think the main reason for the reduction in my stress was often because I was asked about the nature of how I was feeling and why. And so grappling with that question led to progress towards a better emotional state. So just at the end, when they finish the tool, they get a little display about how they were doing. And so just looking at that data, reflecting on it, much like many personal informatics systems, gives them that opportunity to just say, how am I doing right now, essentially. So that was sort of how the tool went over the course of a week deployment. And generally, we think the results were fairly positive. Next, we kind of get into our post hoc analysis of some of the data that we received from these AER tools. And so these are some of the proportions of emotions that were picked up by both of these tools. So typically, this left column here, we're using the residual mask network on the top and then deep face on the bottom. Typically, what you see is a lot of neutral. That's the gray. So most often, the algorithm is just saying the expression on your face is neutral. So you're working, maintaining a sort of neutral posture according to the algorithms. So typically, when we're looking to do sort of an analysis of this data, we remove that neutral data, and so that's the column on the right here. And typically, what we can see, we've separated out from men and women, men on the top, and then women on the bottom here. And so what we kind of see when we look at this data, just generally speaking, is first, the two models make different predictions, right? So they're looking at the same image and they're saying, this has a different emotional prediction than the other network. So there's a little bit of inconsistency in terms of what models are going to say. Further, if we kind of look at it a little bit more, it kind of says like, well, men seem to appear more angry, women seem to appear more sad. And so this could be the potential where it's reinforcing biases that exist already in the training data, because we sort of already knew this from past work that this was how these models were kind of going to describe different participants. So very in line with what we were thinking. I don't know that I would want any of these things trying to predict my emotion and having that being used against me in some way. So very concerning that these things could be being applied in the field. So we tried to make the task a little bit, when we were trying to actually predict emotion, we found it was very hard to do predictions for angry, sad, happy. So it was those discrete emotional categories, very difficult to try and predict with this data. So we decided we would try and make that task a little bit easier by compressing those emotions into positive, negative, and neutral. Unfortunately, even then, we're going to use F1 scores to kind of describe how well that process was going. For residual mask networks, we got a F1 score of 0.43, and for deep face, we got a F1 score of 0.48. And so that's not very good. Essentially, there's not really a good way, at least using the data and tools that we have here, to reliably predict emotions, essentially. Not compared to the ground truth that participants are giving in their ESMs that we're picking up. However, we then decided, since we were also tracking a log of how stressed they are during these tasks, we wanted to see how well we can predict stress from all of this data. Interestingly enough, trying to predict affect or stress from affect alone, actually a little bit better than trying to predict emotions. We get 0.55 F1 score. But as we start adding in that peripheral data, as we start adding in that app-specific data, and even the day or time-specific data, we can actually see that we can get up to a 0.84 F1 score for stress prediction. And that was pretty consistent across using data from both models. And so I wouldn't trust these things to necessarily predict my emotions in some way, but it is possible that they could predict some stress, which is a nice thing to find out of all this data. So certainly we'll talk a little bit more about this during the presentation at CHI, but the main contributions of this work are qualitative insights about unique challenges for CS students. We have developed a sort of novel computer-mediated PI tool that we call Emotion Stream. And so that does seem to provide some contextual insights. Our participants did find it valuable, as well as emotional insights about individual behavior, and particularly stress. We also evaluated the reliability of 2 AER models and the role of stress in context and stress prediction. And we demonstrated that if we take that context and we augment that with emotional cues, it does show promise in stress prediction. So this could be an avenue for future stress interventions further. So our sort of next work that we're working on is deploying a longitudinal data collection with students and hopefully moving that to a knowledge worker cohort of some kind, so maybe software engineers in professional settings. We're also looking to integrate some well-being interventions that go beyond just the digital dashboard that we provide at the end of the sort of experience. So this would be things like reminders to take breaks, get water, do some stretching, sort of somatic interventions, things of that nature, and maybe even some productivity interventions. The other thing is we're largely storing the data locally, so we'd like to start moving that to moving our storage of data to something that might fit into Smart on Fire standards so that we can start integrating that with health systems. And so that's a little bit about Emotion Stream and sort of our work that'll be at CHI this year. Trying to keep this kind of casual, so are there any questions up until on the first part? We're going to shift over to talking a little bit about how new wearables can support physical rehabilitation. So here we're doing a little bit of machine learning to support physical rehabilitation and fitness and exercise sort of tracking. So this is the Henware and Smart Shoe project. It's called Henware because the mascot of Delaware is a blue hen, so it's the Henware, hence. So that was named before I got here. So Henware and sort of what we're going to talk about today is a new sensor. It's leveraging nano-composite-based wearable sensors and machine learning to analyze human movements. And this is work with Sagar Doshi, Eric Thonson, and Jill Higginson, who kind of represent material sciences, mechanical engineering, and then myself at the AI Center of Excellence for Machine Learning. And our students, Donna Kanakala and Caleb Birch, is primarily responsible for this work. So the motivation here is that we would like to expand the range of technologies that are available to physical therapists and coaches so that they can kind of track their clients or their athletes when they're not present, right? What are they doing outside of the lab? What are they doing outside of sort of a training session? What are they doing on their own, essentially? So the problem with sort of doing gait analysis outside of the lab is it's very expensive. Most of the equipment is kind of non-portable. If you are going into a lab, you have very limited time to collect any kind of data. And you can kind of see on the left here, this is a very fancy treadmill with force sensors all along these plates, so we can get lots of very precision data about where their foot is hitting and with how much force. We also have motion camera systems where you got to put all the little white balls along you so that you can track all of your motions. So this is a lot of times the way that we're doing like gait analysis in the lab. Can't really move these setups, can't really take them outdoors, it's very controlled. So there's a sort of critical need for cost-efficient, easy-to-use, comfortable-to-wear gait analysis technology that can kind of provide continuous support for physical therapy and sports rehab monitoring. Now, this is made possible by a new type of wearable that we've been working on. Using electrophoric disposition, we deposit carbon nanostructures into fabrics. So this can be non-woven, woven, or knit fabrics. And we're basically submerging them into a chemical solution and then electrifying that solution. And after that process is complete, there's actually a very limited texture change and almost no change to the breathability of that fabric. So once we've embedded those nanotubes into the textile, it's almost the same as the textile before we submerged it into this chemical process. And so this is the material sciences side of the project. And so this new materials would sort of launch the whole henswear project. Essentially, we call this a from touch to tons sensor. So it's delicate enough to detect just a tiny finger tap. It'll detect your heel strike, and we can roll a forklift over it, and it'll give us a nice range of how, once we've calibrated that sensor for whatever we're going to be running across it, we can get really nice signals in terms of the change of resistance once we electrify the wearable itself. So this allows us to create fiber-based stretch and pressure sensors for human health. They're soft to the touch, they're breathable, and they provide us this kind of resistance or pressure number that comes off of when the material essentially deforms from weight being placed upon it. And so this is a sort of a patented technology that we're now trying to work on applications. And so, what is henwear? So this is the idea that we're going to be building all sorts of different wearables that people can use for physical therapy, rehabilitation, and for athletic training, right? So you can imagine trying to put one of these in the sleeves or knees or even the shoes, which we're going to talk about, to collect a lot of data about how people are performing exercises that might be beneficial for either athletics or rehabilitation. So our goal is to develop wearable technology that is capable of accurately capturing kinetic and kinematic data outside of a laboratory setting, so we can provide feedback for exercise and physical therapy. I'm mostly working on the shoe part of this, where we've embedded basically an insole into a shoe that will allow us to sort of track data. Hopefully where we're going is we've been mostly working with healthy individuals, but hopefully where we're going is to start working with people who have just received a prosthetic. So the idea being that if we can track kind of the resistance value of both of their shoes, we can determine how much weight they're putting on their good leg versus the leg with a prosthetic, right? And the idea is that eventually they need to be able to learn for their rehabilitation how to balance their weight load on that new prosthetic, essentially. So it's roughly a 50-50 split, because if they don't end up doing that, it leads to other negative health implications. So the major application here is, well, we've got our sort of shoe here. It's more of like a sandal. We've got two sensors embedded, one in the toe, one in the heel. And when we kind of combine the two signals that we get from those sensors, as you're sort of walking on a flat ground, your foot is up, you touch down with the heel, you roll it forward, and then you touch up. We spend a lot of the time in our meetings thinking about how we walk. It's a little weird sometimes when you got to think about it. But we get this nice, when you're walking on a flat surface, we get this nice M curve. And that basically tells us that you're walking and you're putting full load and you're sort of rolling your foot there. Now, if you're walking faster or slower, that little M curve kind of extends or shrinks. So essentially, we can also sort of figure out how fast you're walking, because when you're walking a little bit faster, you're putting a little more force into your heels to propel you forward, right? So we've got these sort of M curves when you're walking up and down a set of stairs. We get these sort of like reverse chair curves, and let's just take a little bit of a look at how this sort of works, right? So here we've got our sort of standard flat walk. We've got heel to flat to toe, and so that's how we get that nice M shape here, and it's just by combining the hind foot and the forefoot signals. Walking upstairs is a little bit different, because we don't really. Most of us walk on the toe as we're going up the stairs, and often we can see that the toe is sort of hanging off the back of the stair, or sorry, the hind foot is hanging off the back of the stair here. So we get a much different signal from that hind sensor that pretty much tells us, hey, you're going up the stair, because most of the signal is coming from that forefront, right? We sort of are trying to do this activity determination so that we can figure out what participants will eventually be doing out in the wild, right? Going up and down stairs, maybe walking on flat surfaces, maybe walking on different types of materials, roads, grass, things of that nature. So we're very interested to see how this signal sort of perturbs as we move out of these more controlled conditions. So essentially our process, we collect a lot of raw sensor data. We sort of know the path that people are going to take in a sort of controlled setting. So we have a very simple algorithm that goes through and does some soft labeling of all these different peaks. We're essentially looking at when your foot is up, there's no signal from the sensor. So we kind of know that's the end of a step. And eventually when we have this integrated into two shoes, we'll know which one is a step, because obviously one will be up or down. So we kind of do step extraction. We can sort of see, the front and, the front and back sensor there. We label that either flat, up, or down. And then we use those labels to analyze gait features using machine learning algorithms. And we're mostly doing supervised learning here. We've sort of looked at using our relatively small data set, random forest classifiers, logistic regression, support vector machines. Again, we're using F1 score to kind of look at the performance of these models, and we can kind of see that we're getting pretty good performance out of the random forest classifier. Some of the key features that are providing that performance are things like the area under the curve for the rear and front sensors, which is very helpful for determining, are you on a flat surface or are you going up a stair, because we don't get as much area in that rear sensor. And even if we drill down into the subclass classifications, we see that we're able to generally classify both flat, up, and down steps with pretty good F1 scores and a very low, confusion between these types. Just a little bit further, we also realized, well, we were doing an 80-20 split before, but we started varying sort of our training set size, and we sort of noticed that, like, well, we're over here, but we could reduce the amount of data quite a bit and still maintain pretty good accuracy. But again, we're sort of working with healthy people, and so like they don't have the perturbations in their walking pattern that we're going to see for people who are actually going through something like rehabilitation for physical therapy. So as we start to prove this sort of technology with healthy people, it'll be interesting to see what happens when we start bringing in people who are going through some rehabilitation. So that's sort of the point where we're at in terms of the data collection and what we can do with modeling. We've now started to integrate a knee sleeve here. So we're starting to get the signal for when the knee starts to swing. And basically we're starting to be able to track all sorts of different points on the body and collect information. And basically what we now like to do is start taking some displays like this and putting them in front of physical therapists to determine, like, how might you be able to use this data to determine what your patients are doing, outside of when they're in the clinic. So as far as our sort of next steps go, we're expanding out our sort of data collection to maybe 20 subjects. We're hoping to collect over 5,000 steps, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it takes a long time to collect this data. And then we'd like to start doing applications for prosthetics for measuring limb loads, right? So I talked about that a little bit earlier. We'd really like to know, for example, in this image, how much weight is being put on this prosthetic versus the sort of, good leg there. And we'd like to be able to start using that data to provide small interventions in terms of walking or exercise corrections. So these would be just the same things that a physical therapist might say if you were in the clinic, essentially. Or at least we might be able to provide some feedback to a physical therapist who can then make corrections, when the patient is in front of them, essentially. So we'd like to start working with patients, physical therapists, coaches, trainers on basically user-facing applications. We've been doing mostly data work at this point, but we'd now like to start working on some applications for field testing. And that's sort of what we were working on with Henware. Any quick questions about that project? All right, so we're gonna switch gears a little bit. We've been mostly talking about things for kind of patients and users and whatnot. Now we're going to talk a little bit about decision support for radiologists who are looking at ultrasound images. And here we have some questions about how large vision models might be able to provide support during these important sorts of decisions. for cancer research. So this project is Breast Cancer Ultrasound Plus. It's a comparison of real and synthesized images for training and decision support. It is work done by the newly minted PhD, Abu Rahman Abawi, Kyle Wang, and Dr. Kenneth Barner. And so some of the problems in sort of medical imaging is that there's very limited access to biomedical images, particularly those with annotations for like cancer and things, right? So this provides a pretty strong challenge for training AI models to support, doctors when they're trying to make these kinds of decisions. There's also, even when we do have annotated images, there's also a lot of variability in terms of the expert annotations. This is quite common, especially in data sets that demand a high level of expertise. So it's very hard to get radiologists to sit down and label images for you so that you have enough to train a model. There's also various privacy concerns. Obviously, a lot of this data is medical data, so it's difficult to acquire. So there's actually very few, if any, large-scale breast tumor data sets available for this kind of work. We're looking at largely generating benign and malignant tumors, images of tumors, to try and enhance these sorts of training programs. So the motivation here was, can we make an image that looks like a real image? And sort of prior work has already sort of answered this. Yes, we can use generative AI to create images and their ground truth masks so that we can actually reflect real world examples. And you can kind of see this in the figure. We've got sort of original images over here, and then we've got their ground truth annotations, and we can kind of see these are some synthesized images. And I'm not a radiologist, so I can't tell, but they sort of look right to me. And so we think this could save time for annotations if we can generate these images, and that might aid training purposes, going forward. And so hopefully this will enhance, early detection for cancer, or at least it might be used to train other radiologists and things of that nature. So in this work, we sort of proposed a generative model, a diffusion model that learns the distribution of ultrasound images, enabling it to generate or mimic real world samples. And so we're feeding it in a very small set of images and hoping that it can produce a very large set of images, essentially. Now, the research question that we're sort of interested here is, how do radiologists assess the synthetic images compared to real images? And so we recruited 3 radiologists from the Polish Academy of Sciences to help us assess these generated images. And the task here was that they needed to find the real images versus the generated images. And so the four images that are labeled in green here are the real images, and the remaining are all synthesized images. The reason there's only 4 images in here is because it's possible that our radiologists have already seen the images that are contained in the very few data sets that exist. So we sourced 10 images that from a hospital that we're pretty sure are completely unseen from the radiologists who are looking at this data. But we only have a few of them. So when we ask them to sort of rate as this real or unreal, we can actually see that the radiologists quite easily predicted that the real images were real. But interestingly enough, they sort of identified that about half of the synthetic images were real. So it could be that they're looking at them and it's like, yeah, all of these sort of look real, or most of these look real. But yeah, so 50-50 roughly on whether or not they can identify synthetic or real images. So this is pretty promising. It sort of suggests that we can use these diffusion models to generate pretty good looking ultrasound images. That was with 24 images. We synthesized up to another 31 synthetic images, another 10, and we had them basically now relabel these for malignant or benign cancer. And when we start looking at the results for this next task, we kind of see that first there's generally 60 to 70% accuracy between the labelers. When we start calculating things like Cohen's kappa or Krippendorf's alpha, we actually generally see that there's fairly low agreement amongst radiologists for both original, generated, benign, or malignant. It's all pretty much the same. There isn't much agreement amongst the raters on what these images look like, including for the real images, right? So ultimately, they kind of rate all images fairly inconsistently amongst each other, but there doesn't seem to be any large differences between the underlying types of the images that they're looking at least from their perspective. Here, they didn't really think any of them were synthetic. We didn't really tell them that. They're just judging whether or not it looks like cancer or not. So some of the current challenges here are like, well, why we generated images that resemble real samples. We still need to kind of further validate these with doctors. We need a much larger data set, along with making some improvements to them based on the feedback that we might receive from radiologists. Another thing is that the samples that we were generated were largely, they were supposed to be from benign images. We were largely trying to generate images that looked benign, but many of the images actually ended up resembling malignant or normal cases, which is not what we were initially set out to do from our, as noted by our radiologist collaborators. So there's clearly improvements that can be made in terms of how we're generating those images, so we get like a higher success rate in actually generating the target type of image. Now, that was sort of part A of, can we generate images to help out with training purposes? Part B is, well, if AI can kind of generate images, can it help us assess images? This next part is sort of motivated by analyzing ultrasounds is kind of slow. It's risky for patients. I don't know if you've ever had an ultrasound, but you got to wait several days to get the feedback, because it's got to go, you get scanned, it goes out to the radiologist, then you get the results back. This could take some time. So if AIs can generate images, can a large vision model provide insights about them? And so the aims here were to try and use a large vision model to assist radiologists in decision making about ultrasound images. We wanted to explore how these models might help with interpretation or to understand these images. And mostly what we'd like to do is kind of generate a collaborative framework where we can collect expert feedback, review the images, review LVM output, and then based on those insights, we might be able to refine our image generation process to produce more realistic images, and maybe even better insights if we were to do some kind of like fine tuning or RAG-based training on the the prompts that we give it for making determinations about images. So the very preliminary research questions here are, how can LVMs interpret original and generated ultrasound images, and can these interpretations assist with decision making? So in this case, we used Gemini 1.5 Pro. We gave it not necessarily the simplest prompt, but the prompt was, you are a helpful assistant to a healthcare professional. Based on the attached ultrasound image, assign labels for each condition. Please return the values for the following keys and their corresponding options. And basically the keys are things like the depth of the lesion shape, if there's calcification, which are things that radiologists are generally trained to look at. And then also the, what they might recommend as far as a next step. And then they might give a small explanation at the end here. So the response from Gemini Pro is similar. We get all of the sort of categories that we requested, and then we get an explanation that's like, well, this image shows a classic black round lesion with well-defined circumscribed margins and posterior acoustic enhancement. Again, I'm not a radiologist, so that doesn't really track with me. But that is sort of the output that Gemini provides when trying to assess this image. So once we've run a series of images through this process, we then ask our radiologist panel to first classify that image and then give us an indication of how confident they are in that classification. Next, we provide them with the actual response from the LVM, and we ask them if this description actually matches their assessment of that on a 5-point scale, where higher is worse in this case. And so when we start looking at the preliminary results, well, we see that the radiologists actually, they're very good at identifying things that look like malignant or benign tumors. The LVM, not so much. 0.42 on the F1 score there, so significantly worse than radiologists. Interestingly enough, if we do majority vote on the radiologist decisions, we actually get a much higher 0.84 F1 score. So that kind of reinforces getting multiple opinions on your ultrasounds is a good idea. But I would not trust an LVM to grade my ultrasound just yet. But interestingly enough, when we asked about the sort of quality of the feedback that the LVM responded, the average was about 2.6 in terms of the quality of the description. That's pretty close to the neutral response. So the description and image are somewhat aligned, but not entirely. This could mean that it's not identifying the shape, or it's not identifying the next steps. But this at least indicates that there's some possible promise in using this as a decision support tool. There was also no real difference between the original or generated images. So we got the same sort of assessments across all image types. So Future work for this project is kind of to incorporate sort of standard system metrics. So BI-RADS is the breast imaging reporting and data system. So hopefully being able to get responses from the LVM that could kind of go right into that system directly would be interesting. We also like to update the generative and diffusion models to generate images using a sort of guided approach to accurately improve the synthetic tumor representation. So this is really just maybe supplying specific masks of like oval, irregular, and round shapes that might improve or constrain how certain images are created by the diffusion layer. And so that's a little bit about some of our work with radiologists and how we're hoping to improve cancer screening, essentially. And now I'll just sort of kind of wrap things up and real quick, and we can go into questions if there are any. But today we explored how recent off-the-shelf AAR models provide limited accuracy for emotional prediction, but might actually be good as feature extractors for stress prediction. We demonstrated how machine learning can help make sense of next-generation affordable, comfortable, wearable sensors for physical rehabilitation, and we've probed current capabilities of LVMs to support decision-making in ultrasound images. So hopefully, from this talk, you can agree that AI can enable adaptive, context-aware interventions based on the data to enhance patient experiences, maybe even professional experiences as well. The systems can be integrated within clinical workflows, allowing healthcare providers to gain insights about what patients are doing in the real world, so their behaviors. This could potentially inform decisions about their care. And of course, as I kind of mentioned before, we've sort of glossed over the data privacy, user burden, sort of algorithmic transparency dimensions, but these are all really important to explain how these things work to people who will be making decisions about, based on the inputs, essentially. And so with that, I'm happy to take any further questions, but thank you all for listening.